Welcome back to match 3, chess friends. It's the first to 6 wins, not including draws. McDonnell has already won 1 game. Labourdonnais has won none. This is game 2. Let's see how Labourdonnais gets on with the white pieces. He starts with e4. McDonnell replies e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, and now bishop to c4, the Italian game, and bishop to c5, Giuoco Piano. And we continue with the classical variation, c3, d6, d4 striking in the center, the pawn captures and the pawn captures back, and we have bishop to b6. And now this is called the Labourdonnais variation these days because of these matches that we're going over. We first saw it in match 1, game number 4, and in that game Labourdonnais won, but shortly after they played another game and McDonnell won that with the same opening, so it's hard to say what's going to happen this time. In both of those previous games, Labourdonnais advanced his d-pawn to threaten this knight, which then retreated to e7. But here, Labourdonnais instead plays knight to c3, which is actually the move that our ex-commentator Paul Morphy recommended back in the day. So well done, Labourdonnais. McDonnell plays on with knight to f6, and Labourdonnais pushes his pawn a move later, attacking the knight, of course. And instead of retreating it, McDonnell decides to advance to e5, which leads to an exchange of knights on e5. And here we've actually transposed into the exact same position that we saw in match 1, game number 4, which Labourdonnais won. So Labourdonnais continues with the same moves from that game. He pins the knight with the bishop against the queen, and here, previously, McDonnell castled on the king's side, and what actually happened there was, after castling, the queen came to f3, and it led to an exchange of pieces on f6, finally capturing with the pawn, doubling the pawns, and weakening the king's side. So McDonnell, in this game, decides he doesn't want to do that. He'll try something different instead, so he plays this pawn on the wing to a6. Labourdonnais carries on with the same plan, queen to f3, McDonnell plays queen to d6, and we end up with an exchange of all the pieces on the f6 square, doubling up McDonnell's pawns once more. However, this time, because he didn't castle, he is closer to the center. In the previous game that he lost, he wasted moves uncastling himself from this very exposed position, so maybe he's saved some moves here and will do better in this game. Labourdonnais castles queenside, which actually gives up this pawn, which McDonnell is very happy to grab. Perhaps Labourdonnais was worried about leaving his king on the king side because of the rook here coming to the open file and also all the bishops pointing into this corner. So he's given up the pawn, but his king is now hopefully safe on the queen side. McDonnell is a pawn up, but of course he's got the doubled pawns. We're not sure if this is a hindrance or an advantage at this stage in the game, so we'll continue. We have rook on h to f1, threatening the bishop, so the bishop gives a check, and Labourdonnais moves his king to c2. Rook to g8, threatening the pawn at the end of the open file, so it advances. It's now defended by its pawn friend on the wing, and McDonnell brings his rook to g6. Labourdonnais pushes his central d-pawn, and instead of capturing it, McDonnell pushes his c-pawn past it. And now here, Labourdonnais has an idea. He goes for the bishop sacrifice on f7, capturing a pawn with check. So McDonnell captures it back, saying, all right, Mr. Labourdonnais, what have you got? And Labourdonnais pushes his pawn once more, and now McDonnell can see that his bishop is trapped and he's going to have to give up the bishop. So he captures the pawn, the rook comes up, captures the bishop, delivers a check, the king has to move, and now Labourdonnais has got a choice of pawns to capture. If it were me, I'd probably capture the b pawn here and just wreck McDonnell's pawn structure. But Labourdonnais thought differently. He decided to go for the h-pawn instead. Now, if we count the material, we can see it's all even. They've got 5 pawns each, 2 rooks each, and a knight for Labourdonnais and a bishop for McDonnell. So very much even. Let's see what happens when we continue. Labourdonnais plays rook to h6, offering a rook exchange, which McDonnell accepts, and the bishop is the last one to capture here. And now Labourdonnais brings his rook across to d1 on the open file, and McDonnell decides to start pushing his queenside pawns, b5. Knight to e2, and now more pawn pushes from McDonnell, and Labourdonnais decides to get in on the act and pushes g4. So McDonnell threatens the undefended pawn here with the rook, and of course the wing pawn defends it once more. And now we have c5, continuing to push on the queen side. Here, Mr. Jack Hackett says that Labourdonnais can get himself into a nice position if he plays his knight to c3. And after perhaps b4, the knight can come to b5, and you might be able to get your rook into a nasty position on d6. However, Labourdonnais didn't go for that. He's looking for this outpost square for the knight. After rook to d3, rook to c8, backing up the b pawn, the knight comes over to g3, and then b4 from McDonnell, and now the knight jumps in to f5 in this nice outpost that we mentioned, protected by the 2 pawns. This also threatens the bishop, so the bishop retreats, and now Labourdonnais starts pushing his h-pawn, which is also a pass pawn and could get dangerous very quickly. However, McDonnell ignores it for now and pushes his own wing pawn 1 square, so Labourdonnais plays in kind. He pushes his h-pawn once more, and McDonnell pushes his c-pawn, which threatens the rook, so Labourdonnais is going to have to move the rook. Where does he move it to? Well, he puts it behind his passed h-pawn, which is always a good place for your rook. If you've got a passed pawn, get the rook behind the passed pawn, and it will assist it to the other side. But again, McDonnell ignores this threat and pushes his b-pawn, which actually comes with check. Now, Mr. Jack Hackett told me earlier, when he was sober, that a good move for Labourdonnais here would be king to c3. If he doesn't play this move, then McDonnell's pawn majority on the queen side here is going to become very strong indeed. But Labourdonnais doesn't play this. Instead, he captures with a pawn, and McDonnell now has a slight advantage that will only widen over the next few moves. The c-pawn captures back, which comes with a double check here, so the king is driven back. It goes to b1. And now McDonnell plays king to f7. He needs to get towards the corner to block this pawn now. He's been ignoring it for long enough. He needs to do something about it, so he's sending the king over. The pawn keeps coming. h6, we have king to g8, h7 with check, and the king is in time to block the pawn from getting across to the other side. Very nice, McDonnell, well played. Knight to e3, heading towards the left-hand side of the board, hoping to help out with these pawns, but McDonnell just pushes a3. And here, Mr. Hackett says that the best move for Labourdonnais would be to retreat his rook to h1, but Labourdonnais does not play this. He plays instead pawn captures pawn, and now McDonnell is significantly winning. He, of course, just captures the pawn with the bishop, and you can see that this is now a threat of checkmate in 1 if Labourdonnais doesn't do something about it. The rook is protected on the c1 square, should it be allowed to come here, by the bishop. The pawn is covering these 2 white squares, and of course the rook would cover the whole back rank with check, should it be allowed to come here. A very nice checkmate indeed. Of course, Labourdonnais doesn't allow it. He brings his rook down to h1, but you can see that under his comb-over, he is starting to sweat. So very nicely played, McDonnell. Now here, McDonnell doesn't want to push the b-pawn any further. He wants to leave the checkmate threat hanging, because there's not very much that Labourdonnais can do if he does. If he were to push the pawn, the king will have some escape routes on the white squares. Let's just look what might happen if McDonnell plays something like knight to c6. Well, Labourdonnais can't bring his rook off the first rank. If he moves anywhere along the h-file, then it's just going to be checkmate straight away. If he pushes this pawn, then it's just going to get captured by the black pawn here. The white knight can't move any direction to the right or up because it needs to stay close to the bottom left-hand corner to try to help out if the pawn comes forward. If it were to move away, the pawn would come forward and some exchanges would be forced on c1 with McDonnell having the upper hand. So a good plan for McDonnell here would be maybe knight to c6, and then the only move for Labourdonnais would be to move the rook along the first rank. And the king's going to pick up this pawn in the corner and then start coming forward and slowly pick off all the other pieces until McDonnell wins. However, what did McDonnell do? Well, he decided to push his b-pawn. And of course, the game is now completely drawing, so Labourdonnais stops sweating. And I believe Mr. Hackett has something to say. Okay, thank you, Mr. Hackett. Thank you. The game continued a few more moves from here before they decided it was a complete draw. We have knight to c2 threatening the bishop, so the bishop retreats, and the king captures the pawn here. The rook comes down to threaten the pawn in the center, so the other rook comes across to defend it, and the king picks up the h7 pawn. We have king to b3 attacking the rook. The rook retreats to c8, knight to e3, and now king to g6, rook to f1, and rook to h8, rook to f3, rook to c8, knight to d5, threatening the bishop here, and so the bishop goes to d8, rook to f5, and rook to c1, and it was here that the gentleman decided that it was a draw. So in the next game, game 3, they're going to have the same pieces. Labourdonnais is going to start, because in these matches, if there's a draw, it's just like it's the game didn't happen. So thank you for joining me this time. Sad that McDonnell didn't finish him off, but we'll see what he can do next time. I'll see you then.